Welcome to Sunshine Cathedral's Queer God Squad. It's Thursday, January 16th, 2025. I am Bishop Darrell Watkins, the senior minister here at Sunshine Cathedral. With me today is Sunshine Cathedral's executive minister, he's also my husband, Bishop Robert Griffin, and Sunshine Cathedral's Minister of Connections, the Reverend Dr. Ann Atwell. Visit sunshinecathedral.org to learn more about our progressive faith community and how you can be a part of it, no matter where you live in the world. And if you live in South Florida, be sure to check out the Sunshine Cathedral Center for the Performing Arts, offering entertainment for the LGBTQ+ community to benefit the LGBTQ+ community. If you enjoyed the Queer God Squad, please share this or other episodes with your friends, family, and social media communities. At Sunshine Cathedral, we're here to tell you that you are God's miracle, not God's mistake. This is the Sunshine Cathedral perspective. The Queer God Squad talks about the queering of St. Paul. 13 books of the New Testament claim to be written by the Apostle Paul. Today's scholarly consensus is that Paul only wrote 7 epistles that made it into the New Testament. 1 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, Philemon, and Romans are the authentic Pauline letters. The others, 2 Thessalonians, Ephesians, Colossians, 1 and 2 Timothy, and Titus, were written after Paul's death, in his name, but not by his hand. His writings predate the Gospels. The first letter to the Thessalonians is thought to be the oldest book in the New Testament. According to Scripture, Paul was a lay scholar who violently opposed the Jesus movement, but who on the Damascus Road had a mystical experience of Christ, and thereafter claimed to be an apostle commissioned by the risen Christ to call others to follow the Christ way. Some scholars see evidence of Paul having a gay orientation. But wait, Paul is the one homophobes quote most to justify their condemnation of same-sex love and attraction. It turns out that the 3 passages from Paul that they use can easily be contextualized to show love and mutuality are not condemned by Paul. And it's super noticeable that we pretty universally ignore other things Paul said, like insisting that women be silent in church and have long hair. Paul may not have been as anti-gay as he's made out to be, and even if he was, we could disagree with him. And there may be hints that he was on the lavender team himself. You don't hear this often in queer spaces, but let's talk about Paul. I've had this love-hate thing going on with Paul forever. Mostly hate, like for the first 40 years, 35 years maybe, I don't know, of my life. And then trying to reclaim him a little bit for 3 or 4, and then back to hate. And then trying to reclaim him a little bit for maybe 6 or 7, and then now pretty much to ambivalence. Like, Paul's making me work too hard, so I'm just pretty much through with Paul, because I shouldn't have to work this hard just to be okay with you. Paul, I think, is who's given us the Christianity that makes Jesus an object of worship, instead of the Jesus movement that made Jesus a prophetic voice calling us to form the kingdom of God. I think the Jesus movement in remnant still exists in the Christian faith, but Christianity writ large is Paul's invention. And so if you're really going to be Jesus focused, you can just ignore Paul. Now you're going to have to dig deep to find out what Jesus was about, but Paul is ancillary to me. But it is true that the passages quoted from Romans and Galatians and is it 1 Corinthians? And there's also one from 1 Timothy, but he didn't write 1 Timothy, so with that one. But the other 3, they're all in the context of exploitation or violence. Love is never condemned. The Romans passage where Roman cults would have orgies and things would get so ecstatic and out of control they would hurt themselves, and so he talks about the due penalty in your bodies from So yes, he's talking about orgies where people get hurt. Okay, that's no good. Maybe stay away from that. That's not love. That's not a mutual attraction. That's not even a first date. That's not petting. That's not anything. That's don't go to the sex orgy. Okay, fair enough. And so all of it. The one in Galatians is the words used are, and also in Corinthians, is about prostitution, about not exploiting an older man employing a younger fellow to be his sex object or whatever. So yeah, that's exploitation. that's using people, not for their mind, not connecting with their mind or the soul or the spirit, or even just being attracted to them and seeing where this goes, but exploiting them, buying them, paying for them, manipulating them. Okay, you don't want anybody to be treated that way. So yes, exploitation and violence are condemned. Hooray! Falling in love, never condemned. Exploring love, never condemned. Forming a partnership and honoring your commitments, never condemned. Just noting someone from the side of your eye and saying, never condemned. None of that is ever condemned. And if Paul did condemn, we'd be like, well, who cares? He told women not to cut their hair, and we universally ignore that. Cut to Reverend Ann. So you know what I mean? So who cares? So anyway, yes, we could easily ignore him. Yes, he's blamed for things he didn't say. And thirdly, yes, there are clues of his being gay. What is the thorn in his side thorn in his flesh that he wants removed? It could be this orientation that he can't get rid of, because you can't get rid of it. That's the thing. If it's part of you, it's you. Yes, he was. There's no Mrs. Paul until you get to fish sticks 100,000 years later. But there's no Mrs. Paul, and he has very contentious relationships with men. They all wind up, his partners in ministry all wind up abandoning him eventually, and with saying mean things about him. So he has very contentious relationships with men. What's that about? And then there's this whole thing in Philemon where he has this relationship with a guy, Philemon, and then this guy has a slave called Onesimus, and Onesimus is going back and forth between them, and there's just some weirdness going on. And when he gets out of jail, Paul, he's going to go to Onesimus' house, to Philemon's house, and have a room ready for him. And what is this? Although Philemon has a wife, but other than mentioning her once, she's not in the story. So there's this weird connection between these two guys and this slave, and I've been treating him a certain way, and I want you to treat him a certain way, and that almost sounds like a scene from Oz. And so I do believe there's plenty of hints, not maybe hard evidence, but hints, much more many hints that he wasn't straight than he was. And so yes, it is very possible that Paul was gay. Whether he was or was not, he did not condemn same-sex love and attraction. And if he had, we could say that he was wrong. So that's just all the case. So now, if after all of that, you still think that Paul has some amazing thing to say in 2 Corinthians or, in Galatians, whatever, about something else, fine. Maybe he was smart. Maybe you like him for other things. But don't use him as your bat to beat up gay people, because that's really not going to take you very far.
I think whether he was on Team Lavender or not, I'm a little bit partially believing that he was. I think the importance of this, for me, as we listen to, is to not take the Bible as it is. Yeah. Even for people who study the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but just realize that as you laid it out, like, this was written before this was written before this is how this is written, and this is how all this comes together, and you get all of this before you get to Matthew and all these other guys. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's worth noting, is how you look at and studying and asking the questions, who came first or what came first or how did this happen, where did this happen. Those things are important nuance, I think, to the Christian faith or to faith in general, is maybe to understand those things. And then we get into the character of Paul, very same thing. It was a love-hate relationship with Paul. I never liked Paul because of that one passage, because that one thing that I always mentioned about the thorn in the flesh, I was always considered that to be a part of my problem as a kid growing up. Like, okay, God, I'm praying you get rid of this and everything will be just fine, until you realize you're just fine just the way you're born. So that was how I grew up listening to Paul's life story. Don't be like Paul. Don't have this thorn in your flesh, or get rid of it. And I thought, well,
if Paul couldn't get rid of it, how could you?
Now they're like, well, what is it that Paul's flesh thorn in flesh? Was it alcoholism? Was it all these other things? Some other isms? Why did it just have to be about a sexuality thing? And that's also put into all in context everything that was going on around him.
It might have been James and Peter. They didn't like them very much. They could have been his thorns.
But I think what Paul does is give you opportunity to be open and ask the questions.
Right.
Where does this all go? And given and I like the fact he called himself the first apostle from Jesus himself. It's like, okay, really, Miss Thing.
Yeah.
Did Jesus made me an apostle? Oh, all right. Me too. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. So you're just gonna claim your rightful line in the position. All right.
Dead Jimmy Carter made me vice president. I mean, what? No.
This was long before RuPaul Drag Show that he had been himself. So, but yeah, I think it's just fun and fascinating just to look at the lineage of all this and how it all lines up, and actually what it means to us today and what it doesn't mean to us today also.
And I think it's important that we know that Paul's writing letters.
Yeah.
Sometimes to a group, We weren't in that group.
Right.
And sometimes to a person. He had no idea the weird, super intimate stuff he's writing to Philemon. He didn't know anybody other than Philemon was going to read it. You know, and that seems like a very personal letter. So these are letters, and letters are written to people, to groups, to communities, to persons, to an editor of a paper in a community. You write a letter specifically. He didn't write a letter to Anne Atwell. Right. There is no Paul's letter to Bishop Robert. So these are letters, and you can read someone else's mail if you want to. But it might get confusing if you then believe it's to you.
Right. I actually took, when I was at the Episcopal Divinity School, I took Larry Will's class, Paul.
One of the best.
It was absolutely one of the best. And he said exactly that. You have to remember that when you're reading Paul, he wasn't writing to you. He wasn't writing to you. And the beauty of that is that you can read it now, and then read it again in a year, and read it again in a couple years. And you're going to get something different from it every single time. But with the mindset, he wasn't writing to you.
Not about me.
Exactly. So glean from it what you can, what you will, and be very aware.
Yeah.
You're not in there.
Yeah.
You're not in there.
You know, and I would be hard pressed to stand in anybody's pulpit today to tell women to keep silent, cut your hair this way, you must dress this way. You know, and you know, I'm thinking about this.
If you could get away with it, you'd still be embarrassed.
Yeah, this
You probably get hurt too.
Yeah,
just FYI.
You know, there's this clip that's just going on right now on social media about this minister who brought this woman in front of the congregation and shamed her for becoming pregnant and not being married. I'm like, that's not what this is about.
Yeah.
No.
You know, and using
That's malpractice. That's
to
abuse.
justify that.
Control.
That's not what this is about. And so I think we just have found ways to keep all this open, to be mindful that we take what feeds us, and the rest of it is not a part of our journey. Do it. But Paul, good or bad, right or wrong, he was.
Yeah.
He was on that journey.
And remember, he was violent. If we can trust his own testimony and Luke's, although I sometimes wonder if he and Luke were as close as Luke claims. I think Luke has an agenda too. But anyway, they because he's telling Paul's story, but also contradicts Paul. So, but whatever.
Yeah.
That according to the story, he was evil, wicked, wretched, mean, horrible, dastardly, but then has a conversion.
Yep.
But even the conversion is violent.
Yeah.
Like, who gets their conversion by being struck blind? Like, that's not. And no, but if you go to this person's house and do what you're told, then maybe we'll fix it. I mean, the whole conversion story is a text of terror, really. And so this is a violent.
Oh, I was struck blind on.
I'm saying this thing. I was going to hurt some people, and then I got hurt. Can you stand
I
it?
got struck blind on. Boy, that's a drama.
Right? But so, like, he's going to do violence. He experiences violence. So violence is very much a part of his psyche. And so when you see things that are mean, or well, who's writing it?
Yeah.
Someone who thought a lot about violence, either committing it or being victimized by it. Violence is his thing. Violence is his jam.
It is.
So when you see things about him, like, well, who's writing that? Somebody who's got some issues.
That's very, very telling.
Well, that's today with the Queer God Squad. We want to thank you for joining us. We're here daily at 3 p.m. to have some fun and to discuss what our LGBTQ plus community is talking about.
Sunshine Cathedral is the world's leading progressive queer church. Progressive, queer, and God are words that naturally should go together.
We are all in this together. Remember that.
You are God's miracle and not God's mistake. Until next time, we are the Queer God Squad.